Good morning, everyone. This is the Committee on Law and Government. We have attained a quorum with Councilman Jones, Councilwoman Gimm, and Council President Clark. Ms. Marconi, will you please read the first bill and resolution before us today, please?
Bill number 171109, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified electors of the City of Philadelphia of the proposal set forth in a resolution approved by council, proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter relating to the provision of mandatory training for city officers and employees regarding sexual harassment in the workplace, and authorizing the appropriate officers to publish notice and to make arrangements for the special election. And Resolution 171134, resolution proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter relating to the provision of mandatory annual training for all city officers and employees regarding sexual harassment in the workplace, providing for the submission of the amendment to the electors of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Please call the first panel.
Jovita Hill, Monica Brock, Nolan Atkinson, and Amber Hikes.
Okay, while they're approaching, if everybody could just give me a second. We want everyone to get their point across. You come up. But we also have a lot of people who want to testify today on 4 different issues. So in order to be fair to them, we want to try to move this as quickly as possible. If you have a written testimony, it will be made part of the record. You do not have to read the whole testimony into the record. It will be made part of the record, so you can just summarize. And again, we want you to get your point across, but we ask you to be as concise as possible. Whoever would like to go first, please identify yourself and proceed.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Councilman Greenlee, Councilman Brown, and members of the committee. I'm Monica Marchetti Brock, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Labor Relations for the Kenny administration. We come before you this morning to testify in support of Bill number 171109 and Resolution 171134, sponsored by Councilwoman Brown. Thank you for inviting me to testify. As proposed to be amended, we would like to authorize mandatory anti-sexual harassment training for all city employees. Thank you for acknowledging the importance of strong policies in this area for our city workforce. It is against long-standing policy to engage in verbal, nonverbal, or physical conduct that denigrates or shows hostility or aversion towards an individual because of their sex, gender identity, or sexual orientation. As an employer, the City of Philadelphia is committed to providing a work environment for all employees that is free from sexual harassment, that is consistent with both the spirit and the letter of all federal, state, and local employment laws, as well as the sponsor's proposed charter amendment. To that end, city policy establishes a fundamental standard of conduct that employees are to conduct themselves in a professional manner and treat coworkers with dignity, respect, and in a manner that is not offensive. In the Employee Relations Unit in the Mayor's Office of Labor Relations, we are tasked with the implementation of the city's sexual harassment policy for the administration, including conducting anti-sexual harassment training for all employees. The most effective means against sexual harassment is prevention. Harassment does not go away on its own. However, in addition to policy and procedures, an effective training program will assist in preventing harassment and support individuals who are being harassed to come forward and to address the problem promptly and effectively. Consistent with this legislation, our goal is to train each employee upon hire and to provide additional training throughout their career with the city. Since 1984, by Executive Order 8411, issued by Mayor Good, the City of Philadelphia has mandated sexual harassment training for managers and supervisors. We have for some time offered regular anti-sexual harassment training sessions and have received a steady increase in requests from departments and agencies throughout the city for additional anti-sexual harassment training for all employees, not only managers and supervisors. We are excited to share the objective of mandatory periodic anti-sexual harassment training for officials and employees with the sponsor. We agree that providing anti-sexual harassment training is necessary as an effective means of prevention and providing employees with the knowledge and means to report a problem for prompt and effective resolution. We agree with Councilwoman Brown that now is the time to expand the anti-sexual harassment training for our city workforce. Thank you to the chair, the members of the sponsors, for the opportunity to testify this morning. My colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll hear from the whole panel before whoever would like to go next.
Good morning, Councilman Greenlee and members of the committee. on Law and Government. I am Javita Hill, the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Commission for Women and the Mayor's Office of Engagement for Women. I appear here today in support of Bill number 17109 and Resolution 171134, calling for an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter that would require mandatory sexual harassment training. Our office is committed to a social justice agenda that promotes civic, educational, and economic policies that enhance the lives of women and girls at all stages of their lives through the advocacy of equal rights and economic opportunities. We are particularly grateful to Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, Councilwoman Quinones Sanchez, Councilwoman Blackwell, Councilwoman Gim, Councilwoman Parker, and Councilwoman Bass for introducing Bill 17109. While sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination that violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we know from recent headlines from all sectors of the workforce that sexual harassment is a much too common occurrence. We also recognize that the best tool for preventing sexual harassment is training at all levels of the workforce. This adds some assurances that all employees have a clear understanding of what sexual harassment is and that it will not be tolerated. We are at a significant moment in time fueled by the Me Too phenomenon. It is encouraging that this body and this proposed amendment to our Home Rule Charter is at the forefront of a cultural shift that recognizes that all workplaces, public and private, should provide an environment where all people, no matter their race, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity, can thrive and perform to their fullest potential. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Amber Hikes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Affairs. The Office of LGBTQ Affairs is committed to the support, protection, and engagement of Philadelphia's lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and transgender residents, as well as the LGBTQ-identified employees working within the city. The office develops priorities for the city on issues including public safety, education, economic development, health and city services, and civil rights regarding LGBTQ Philadelphians. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify today in support of Councilwoman Reynolds Brown's charter amendment mandating annual sexual harassment training for all city personnel. Training of this kind is especially significant to the LGBTQ community because LGBTQ people experience sexual harassment at rates that far exceed their colleagues. Unsurprisingly, transgender people bear the brunt of this harassment. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and a large-scale survey of transgender individuals, 50% of respondents reported being harassed at work, and additionally 41% reported being asked unwelcome questions about their transgender or surgical status. In similar accounts of inappropriate workplace behavior, LGB employees report that coworkers make suggestive allusions to their intimate relationships and their sexual behaviors. Although such questions may be asked out of overly invasive curiosity rather than targeted or predatory sexual interest, this kind of intimidating questioning about one's body and personal relationships is a form of sexual harassment. Mandated sexual harassment training will provide city employees the education that's necessary to abate and eradicate this kind of dehumanizing, direct examination of an already marginalized group. LGBTQ employees deserve workplace environments where they can be a part of conversations with coworkers without their bodies and their relationships becoming the topic of discussion. Without mandated training, we put lesbian, gay, bisexual, and especially transgender employees at risk. So I'm here today to support this charter amendment on behalf of the LGBTQ community working in Philadelphia city government, and I extend my sincerest thanks to Councilwoman Reynolds Brown for inviting me and the Committee on Law and Government for hearing my testimony today. I appreciate the opportunity to testify, and I'm here to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Atkinson, you want to testify, and then we'll get to any questions? Sir, are you testifying too, or? No, okay, good. You're here for moral support, very good. Good morning.
Good morning. Councilman Greenlee, Councilwoman Brown, and members of this committee. I am Nolan Atkinson, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Kenny Administration. I come before you this morning to testify in support of Bill number 171109 and Resolution number 171134, sponsored by Councilwoman Brown. As my colleague Monica Marchetti Brock of this Office of Labor Relations has described, this legislation proposes a Home Rule Charter amendment to require mandatory sexual harassment training of all city officers and employees. My office is dedicated to realizing the principle that diversity and inclusion are fundamental to the success of city government and Philadelphia as a whole. For many of us in this room, the most immediate example of this is in our city workforce. Our public servants, whether exempt or civil service, are entitled to a workplace where their gender identity, race, national origin, or disability is a source of strength and never an occasion for victimization. For this reason, sexual harassment in all of its forms is antithetical to a vital, functioning, diverse, and inclusive workplace. We need to know that workers at all levels can come to work and perform their jobs without fear of inappropriate, unwanted advances or the oppressiveness of a degrading environment. Sexual harassment is discrimination on the basis of gender, and gender is at the core of every person's identity. We owe it to our workforce of dedicated public servants to ensure a safe workplace where they will not face the indignity of sexual harassment. For that reason, I am happy to lend my support and the support of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to this legislation, which, as it is proposed to be amended, will require all workers throughout every part of city government to undergo mandatory, periodic sexual harassment training. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. Thank you all for your testimony. First, want to recognize Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, the sponsor of this bill and resolution. Councilwoman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members, and let me thank the administration for the testimony. My opening remarks that has led us to this hour are as follows. First, I need to say thank you to everyone in attendance that have stepped away from your busy lives to join us at this hearing where a number of important bills will be measured. I would also be very remiss not to offer a special thank you to all of the women of City Council. While I am the lead on this effort, it happened because of the collective thoughts from Councilwoman Bass, Blackwell, Gim, Parker, and Quinones Sanchez, who are co-sponsors of this important, unprecedented legislation. I also want to say thank you to the Mayor's Office staff and policy team and the Mayor's Commission for Women and my staff for the valuable input. My staff and members of the administration were on the phone up until 8 p.m. last night where we wanted to figure out how we can do this. This is my principal philosophy, be it a parent to a child, an employer to an employee, a team coach to a teammate. You cannot hold people responsible for that which they do not know. You cannot hold people responsible for that which they do not know. Chairman Greenlee, please note that a copy of the amendments to Resolution 171134 was circulated to all the members of the committee. Here are the facts. Sexual harassment in the workplace is a widespread, intergenerational, and complex epidemic. 33 million American women were sexually harassed at work in 2017. 33 million. 14 million were sexually abused at work. To make matters worse, out of these millions of women who have experienced unwanted sexual advancements in the workplace, 95% report that male harassers never received consequences. These numbers are simply unacceptable. And parenthetically, if we look to see what's happening in DC, we can understand that. Enforcing mandatory training for sexual harassment is a concrete, tangible step in the right direction. Training is intended to educate, enlighten, and inform employees on the civility and appropriate behaviors we should hold towards our coworkers, making certain to stress not only how to act, but how not to act and how not to conduct ourselves in the workplace. Research matters. Studies indicate that more women report incidents of sexual harassment when sexual harassment is clearly defined. Studies indicate that more women are willing to report sexual harassment when sexual harassment is clearly defined. Our goal, therefore, is to make certain to provide that definition to all city employees with no exceptions. Amendment has been circulated to all the members of the committee that streamlines the process for creating rules for sexual harassment training. I want to say thank you to the administration for working with us to ensure that we have regular, mandatory sexual harassment training that will soon be a reality, not just for supervisors, but for every single city employee in Philadelphia city government. Further, I look forward to working with the administration as we move to ensure that training occurs in the most effective, best practice manner possible to eliminate, ultimately, this type of behavior in the halls of government. In closing, the fact of the matter is this: women across the country are right. The time is up. Together we can work towards a world and workplaces where more people, #BelieveWomen, where perpetrators of harassment are indeed prosecuted with due process, and most importantly, where less women have to live in fear of being harassed when they walk into their workplace every day. For these reasons, and on behalf of all of the women of Philadelphia City Council, and with the support, of collective support, we thank you, everyone who joined us in crafting this legislation. And again, I say that this has truly been a team effort. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and that your amendments will be offered at the meeting of the committee after we finish the hearing. Councilwoman Gim?
I just had a quick question for Ms. Hikes. Hello, good morning. Do you anticipate having some participation in the shaping of what the training looks like from the perspective of, particularly with our trans community and our LGBTQ community?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. And in fact, we've actually already started working with labor relations at the behest of the Chief of Staff, Jane Slusser. So about 3 months ago, Jane asked me to kind of look at the training and see how sexual orientation and gender identity were already represented and how we could help amend it and really really bolster and make and just really support and improve that training. So we've already started looking at that, and we've been working closely with amending the training so far. So we look forward to doing that more.
That's good, because I think you and I even had an experience together when we were trying to figure out how to talk with some of our staff about, use of bathrooms, identification, how people identify and what facilities they choose to use. And I just wanted to make sure that you felt like you would have a role to play around.
We're already in contact and working on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other questions or Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
Yes. I understand that the administration is currently reviewing its sexual harassment training policies across city government. Ms. Marquita Brock, could you update us on the process and where it stands as we sit here this morning?
Yes, hi. We're in the process of creating an anti-sexual harassment task force that will review policies, procedures, training, best practices. We're in the initial stages of creating that task force right now, but we're trying to streamline the process so that we can modify and make changes very quickly.
That's encouraging. Will the membership of that task force capture departments and employees across the government?
Yes, we're basically looking to see who the stakeholders are, and we are trying to encompass people from across the government.
And when might you expect, knowing that life always kicks in government, when might you expect the task force to finish its work? What's the long-term end goal?
I don't have a specific date. I know we're meeting bi-weekly because it is such an important initiative for the administration. So we are meeting on a bi-weekly basis, and we anticipate having something,
I didn't hear the end of that.
I'm sorry. We
End of that
anticipate
answer.
having something as soon as possible. It's just hard to nail down a timeline because we want to make sure that we are focusing on everything. We don't want to rush it, but we do understand that it is important and it has to be streamlined.
Well, I certainly appreciate wanting to get it right. There's no need to rush it because we want to get it right if we want to indeed ensure that everyone in government understands what that looks like. And so the task force has recently been convened, so are we talking about 6 months, 9 months, a year? Are you the leader of the task force?
I am.
Okay,
Yes.
so we know that if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So have you framed out when you want to see the task force render an assessment or a summary of the work?
We're in the project timeline phase
Okay,
right now. So we're
okay.
identifying tasks that need to be completed, that need to be reviewed, and we should have a timeline in the near future. I'm not prepared to give that to you today.
Okay, all right, then that's fair. So I'll ask that at whatever juncture that's ready, that you submit a summary to the chair of this committee.
Absolutely.
All right. To Ms. Amber Sykes, thank you for your testimony. It's quite enlightening. And too often we forget that there are others among us whose world is so much more troubling than many of us. I appreciate you in particular, your advocacy on behalf of transgender individuals. What kind of information do we have on transgender individuals working in city government?
So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data on the amount of transgender employees that we have in city government. We are working with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to collect some data for LGBT city government officials in general, but specific with the transgender population, we don't collect that data for privacy reasons, as you can imagine. But we're working towards that. What I can tell you anecdotally is that for the last, I came to city government in March 2017, and since then, I've had no less than 10 folks who have transitioned within city government, so either city employees who have transitioned and have experienced harassment, frankly, during their transition, and that's from fellow employees and also from supervisors.
Wow.
And often it's been what I consider pretty blatant harassment, but in a lot of cases, the folks who were doing the harassing did not know that they were in the wrong. And so we've been having conversations with HR managers and with supervisors about appropriate behavior and conduct, but frankly, having some sexual harassment training is really essential, and it'd be necessary. To your point, people don't know what they don't know, and so unless we are educating them, it's really hard to hold them to a certain standard.
Well, that testimony underscores the value and importance of us doing this in a way that's appropriate to try to level the playing field with whoever we are. I'll close by saying that we're not the first, second, or third city that's trying to figure this out, because we do look to see what other cities are doing, but we're glad now to be on the list of cities who are doing something around this new world order and this transformative issue called sexual harassment. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to recognize that Councilman O, a member of the committee, is present, and also recognize him for a question and comment.
All right, thank you very much. And I just completed my mandatory sexual harassment training. Just let me ask you this. So there is currently a policy, there is mandatory sexual harassment training. What is the difference in your minds between having a law, a policy, a rule, and why a charter change, and then why not a charter change for other rules, laws, and policies?
Point of information?
Councilwoman
Mr.
Reynolds Brown?
Chairman, I believe, Councilman, that might be appropriate for me to answer.
Oh, certainly, thank you.
First, in doing the homework with what is happening both at the, with a couple other cities across the country, because quite frankly, there are very few that have moved to actual legislation, but following what's been happening at the state level and following what's happening at the federal level, and knowing that we've had sexual harassment rules and regulations, we found no evidence that the rules and regulations were being implemented, executed, dealt with, heard. And what I've learned here being in council, if you want something to happen for sure, it needs to be in writing. And even in legislation, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And so we opted to, the only way to ensure that it's mandatory long after you and I are gone is to make sure it's a part of the city charter and changes the code requiring everyone forever going forward, working in government, should be required to take mandatory sexual harassment training, and also given a cultural shift around this issue. If we're going to attempt to eradicate it, it's probably an idealistic view, but minimize it, then, and if we know that we can only hold people responsible for that which they know, the only way we can be assured that they know it is to require it, making it mandatory.
Thank you very much, Councilman, for that explanation. I certainly appreciate it. The only thing I'll say is that I see that the administration is supporting this, and so I will hope, perhaps expect you to support my bill when I introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Guess we have to see what that bill is. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ms. Marconi, will you please call the next panel, please?
Monique Howard, Rupali Patel Shah, Eric Meyer, Rebecca Reinhardt, and Dawn Chavou.
Other than those names, is there anyone else here that wanted to speak on this bill? There is. Okay. All right. Just one more? Why don't you come up and sit in the black seat so we can kind of, because again, we've got a long list of testifiers here for a number of bills. Again, I'm going to try this one more time. Please, because we have a lot of people that wish to testify, please try to keep your remarks to the point and concise. We'd appreciate it. Whoever would like to go first.
Good morning. Thank
Good
you
morning.
for the opportunity to speak. I will be very brief.
Thank you.
To the distinguished members of this committee, my name is Dawn Chavou. I'm a business owner, a wife, a mother of 2 beautiful young boys, and I'm an advocate for women's rights. I also serve on the executive board of the Philadelphia Commission for Women. I would like to thank Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown for her leadership in spearheading this very important legislation on proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter to require mandatory training for all city officers and employees regarding sexual harassment in the workplace, and for providing the submission of the amendment to the electors of Philadelphia. As a committee person in the 3rd Division of the 36th Ward in South Philadelphia, I will be advocating for the constituents in my division to support this amendment and to vote in favor of changing the Home Rule Charter to make sexual harassment training mandatory. Our city should have no tolerance for sexual harassment, sexual assault, or abuse, and I look forward to lending my voice to continue advocating and supporting legislative measures that take preventative steps to address this very important issue. Councilwoman Brown, I would like to personally thank you for all of the work you do on behalf of women and girls in our city to uplift us, protect us, and support us, as well as create an equal playing field for us. Thank you as well to the members of the City Council and for the opportunity to speak at today's hearing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, identify yourself in person.
Members of the council, my name is Rupali Patel Shah, and I'm here as a proud Philadelphian, a woman, the mother of a young daughter, as an attorney, and as a concerned citizen. First, I'd like to extend my deepest thanks to Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown for sponsoring this, and the women of City Council for supporting her in this initiative. I believe Councilman just made a comment about why should we amend this and make it a charter amendment as opposed to just passing legislation or a requirement. As a Philadelphian, the fact that my government is willing to make a institutional change of this magnitude is very powerful and comforting to me. The issue of sexual harassment is a prevalent, insidious, and systemic one. While the Me Too movement may have cast a bright light on this, women of all ages, of all walks of life, and many men too, will tell you that the matter of sexual harassment is one that has affected them, has made them feel diminished and less dignified and respected in the workplace. And curing that and addressing that is a process that's going to be iterative. And our government willing to model that process for us by showing us that it's that important is a big step for Philadelphians. I work in the private sector. Most private sector employees have required mandatory sexual harassment training for decades. Because like Councilwoman Brown said, you can't fix what you do not know. Educating our fellow workers in treating each other with respect and dignity makes for a productive workplace. It makes for a productive government. And the City of Philadelphia modeling that for its citizens by requiring all of its employees to undergo this kind of training is a powerful signal that this is a place that is not going to tolerate that behavior anymore. I appreciate your time today. Thank you. And again, thank you so much to the women of City Council for bringing this initiative forward.
Thank you. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Good morning. My name is Monique Howard. I'm the Executive Director of Women Organized Against Rape, WAR, the only rape crisis center in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you to Councilwoman Reynolds Brown and the Women Council members for inviting me to present testimony on the bill and the accompanying resolution. The effects of sexual harassment are severe for individuals, workplaces, and whole communities. This is a watershed moment. As we continue to be bombarded with sexual harassment allegations among many elected officials and within several industries, as the Me Too and the Time's Up movements continue to gain momentum, and the leader of this free nation expresses sympathy for those accused of sexual harassment. When your leader makes note of supporting the accused and not the victim, it answers the age-old question of why do people wait so long to report? Where does this leave the victims? Sexual harassment is about the misuse of power. It's present in industries where women do not have equal decision-making authority, male-dominated industries where women are seen as interlopers, service-based industries where employees rely on tips and customer approval, low-wage jobs like hotel cleaners or farm workers where there is limited bargaining power to push back. Gender inequality and imbalance of power fosters an environment that is ripe for abuse and harassment against women. In some places, this data shows that 85% of women have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. 75% of harassment victims experience retaliation when they report it. And somewhere between 87 and 94% of employees experience harassment do not file a formal complaint. All employees deserve to feel safe and supported at work. Employees deserve to not be sexually harassed at work, or at least not fear retribution if abused or reported. At WAR, we will continue to conduct trainings that define consent and boundary setting, utilize an enhanced bystander intervention to train personnel to understand predatory behaviors and intervene with effective, creative responses, and conduct engaging programming on sexual harassment in the workplace. And at WAR, we strongly believe that all employees deserve to feel safe and supported at their job. We will do all that we can to ensure that. Thank you very much, Councilwoman Reynolds Brown. Because of you, the city will recognize the importance of taking proactive steps to ensure and support a safer workplace for their employees, responding appropriately to sexual harassment and taking measures to prevent it, and important steps to ending harassment. Thank you for working hard to continue to make Philadelphia a safe city.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The other two witnesses could come to the table, please, and then if there's any questions or comments.
Mr. Chairman, while they come to the table, I would offer a suggestion or recommendation for those who've done this well in the corporate world and for WAR who does it already, that you reach to the administration to examine where a partnership can be developed and working with the city to craft this ultimate sexual harassment training. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Whoever would like to go first, please identify yourself.
Good morning. My name is Vanessa Fields, and I am speaking this morning on behalf of the leadership and membership of the Philadelphia chapter of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, where I serve as a trustee. I have almost 30 years of experience representing employees of the City of Philadelphia as a leader of ASME Local 2187 and District Council 47. CLU represents hundreds of union women in the Philadelphia area, many of whom work in the male-dominated occupations where there are no protections for those who complain about harassment and abuse on the job. Philly CLU salutes the women of Philadelphia City Council for introducing Bill 171109 and Resolution 171134. The City of Philadelphia must set an example of high standards for the rest of the employers in the city by training all employees about acceptable behavior on the job and by developing procedures that will assure all workers that their complaints of mistreatment will be heard, investigated, and remedied without negative consequences to the injured parties. Over the years, many women have come to CLU for advice and support when they have been subjected to humiliating, traumatizing, and frightening actions by co-workers and supervisory personnel. Some of these women worked for the city, including several in the police and fire departments, and they told us some horrifying stories. While CLU was able to provide moral support and some legal advice or referrals, the truth is that most of these women had little recourse. The climate in the workplace was such that they felt making complaints would bring more harm to them than it would to the perpetrators, and could jeopardize their opportunities for promotion and advancement in their careers. They feared for their own safety and even for their families. More than one sought counseling or medication, and some felt that they had to leave jobs they loved rather than continue working in such a toxic environment. Those of us in union work and women's organizations have long known these issues were serious problems, but I think even we are amazed at what we are learning in the media every day now about the pervasiveness and extent that sexual harassment and assault invade workplaces of every description, even against women who we view as powerful and protected. If women with international renown who are pulling down multi-million-dollar salaries are victimized and feel helpless, imagine how vulnerable the average working woman is in a workplace with a sexist culture and no viable protections. No one should go to work each day worrying about what embarrassment or threat or assault they might have to suffer before the day is over. Workplaces should be safe, professional environments where people can expect to be treated with respect and courtesy and trust. We applaud Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown and all the co-sponsors of this bill for taking these issues seriously and for seeking solutions and a transformation in workplace culture. In solidarity, Philly CLU.
Thank you. Sir, if we could hear from you, and then we'll have any questions or comments. I see the city controller has come too. Yep, please. Yep.
Councilman Greenlee, Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, members of City Council, thank you for offering me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Eric Meyer. I'm a partner in the Labor and Employment Practice Group at Dilworth Paxson LLP. I also publish a labor and employment law blog called The Employer Handbook and serve as a volunteer mediator with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Additionally, I am a frequent lecturer across the country on all things employment law, including sexual harassment. Someone recently commented to me that I live and breathe employment law. I did not correct him. I am honored to be here today to discuss this much-needed legislation. In 2016, the EEOC Select Task Force on the Study of Harassment in the Workplace was formed. Its mission was to address the consistent problem of workplace harassment and to propose solutions to the problem. Consider that the EEOC receives tens of thousands of charges of workplace discrimination each year, while many other victims of workplace harassment suffer in silence. Roughly 3 out of 4 individuals who experience harassment do not complain to their employer. So how can we fix this problem together? The task force identified leadership and accountability as 2 starting points. This legislation is part of that bedrock. What must follow now is a holistic approach that includes buy-in at all levels. The city must create systems to foster an organizational culture in which harassment is not tolerated and in which respect and civility are promoted. I have personal experience conducting anti-harassment training for the 1st Judicial District here in Philadelphia. It doesn't have to be all legalese and PowerPoints. I have seen the benefits of live training fueled by plain English and pragmatism. This promotes overall engagement, and employees leave better educated and know that there is a commitment from the city to protect them. Requiring annual sexual harassment training is long overdue. Thank you again, Councilwoman Reynolds Brown and members of City Council, for offering me the opportunity to testify today. I am happy to answer any questions that you may have for me.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you both. I see our city controller is here. Please approach. First of all, I think this is the first time you've come in your new role, so welcome.
Yes.
If memory serves me, you've been here once or twice, so you know how this place works. So please identify yourself and proceed.
Sure. Oh, having a little chair issue here. There we go.
Okay.
Rebecca Reinhardt, City Controller. And yes, it is my first time here as City Controller, so thank you.
Not
good
your
morning.
first time here.
No. I'm having memories of all the budgets we've done together, so. Good morning, Councilman Greenlee, Chair of the committee, and members of the Law and Government Committee. My name is Rebecca Reinhardt, Philadelphia City Controller. I am here today to testify on Bill number 171109, which will place a charter change question on the May ballot to provide for mandatory annual training for all city employees regarding sexual harassment in the workplace. First, I'd like to thank Councilwoman Reynolds Brown for her leadership on this issue. For too long, sexual harassment in the workplace has been a taboo subject, a whispered warning, or a deafening silence. In the wake of the Me Too movement, revelations about the culture at the Philadelphia Parking Authority, allegations about inappropriate behavior at the Sheriff's Office, and a recent $1.2 million payout by the police department, the time has come for the voice of sexual harassment victims to be heard. Last month, I announced that my office would undertake a performance audit of the city's policies and procedures regarding sexual harassment and sexual misconduct in the workplace. This audit will include a review of policies, the process for reporting allegations of harassment or misconduct for city employees, how these incidents are handled, and an analysis of payments made by the city related to sexual misconduct. This audit will provide invaluable insight into the scope of the problem and will make recommendations for improving sexual harassment policies and procedures. I believe that mandatory annual sexual harassment training, high-quality training for all city employees will be one of the recommendations our team makes. A work environment where employees feel safe is a productive and efficient workplace. I believe that seeking a charter change requiring sexual harassment training is an important and needed step toward better protecting city workers. Thank you, and this concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Reinhardt. Any questions or comments?
I just want to say thank you very much. It's great when different areas of government are all on the same page, pushing towards the same end. So thank you for your testimony and welcome in your new role.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank you for your leadership on this issue.
Hold on one second. Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good to see you here.
Good to be here.
So I appreciate your clarity and your boldness in identifying agencies that have been long written about for having sexual harassment, a pretty long-standing problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you are willing to and have stepped forward to audit them, which I applaud and appreciate.
Thank you, Councilman.
I do have a question, though.
Sure.
My question is, when dealing with an agency that has a pervasive history of sexual harassment, when you audit them, in what manner do you believe you will be able to curtail, stop, prevent sexual harassment that pervasive that goes to the highest level of the agency?
So through the audit, what the performance audit will be doing is looking how sexual misconduct complaints are handled in agencies and departments across the city. And through that, there will be recommendations made on what changes need to be made in order to better protect employees and strengthen or even create mechanisms so that the type of dysfunction that we've heard about does not continue?
Well, thank you. I look forward to reviewing your plan. I'd like to briefly just say that in my prior life, as an attorney, I have sued on behalf of women who have been sexually harassed. And in my law firm, we would have a reporting process for any employee. If you felt that you were being harassed sexually, here's who you report it to. If you have a problem with me, here's who you report it to anonymously. My concern is that we can always deal with low-level people and someone who's a supervisor, but really, we should go to the very top.
Absolutely.
It should be transparent. There should be consequences at the very top. Thank you.
Thank you, and I completely agree with you. I look forward to hopefully working with you once we have recommendations in place for making some changes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Jones?
Madam Controller, I like saying
Councilman.
that. That's the first time I've ever had the opportunity to say that.
Oh, I like the way it sounds.
I just want to go on the record saying that Me Too also means Men Too,
Yes.
and that there are ongoing cases where men have been sexually harassed by other men. And in one case, and I won't go into the great details of it, pictures were sent vis-a-vis iPhones and other things, encouraging certain activities. And what for men who suffer in that regard, there is a stigma of being a man, and that you're not supposed to even talk about it. So in your audits, in your protecting of workers in the city of Philadelphia, don't forget that Me Too means Men Too as well.
Absolutely.
I encourage my colleagues to remember that as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions or comments? Anyone else here? Thank you, Ms. Reinhardt. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll see you again. Anyone else here to testify on this bill or resolution? Seeing none, just for the record, we have written testimony submitted in support of this bill and resolution from Kathleen Davis, Human Resources Management, Laura Wentz, Coalition of Labor Union Women, and Tara Murtha from the Women's Law Project. Pardon me? We don't. Okay, I was told we have it. We might not have it. We might get it eventually. Okay. That concludes the testimony on this bill and resolution. Ms. Marconi, will you please read the title of the next bill, please?
Bill number 17113, an ordinance amending Chapter 9-4300 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Wage Theft Complaints to make various wage-related violations a violation of the code, to further provide for determinations by the city regarding wage theft complaints, and for appeals of such determinations, and making technical changes all under certain terms and conditions.
And the witnesses are?
Crystal Miller and Nadia Hookah.
Okay, there we go. As they're approaching, just for the record, this is a bill that I introduced that actually adds basically just some technical amendments to a bill we passed, I guess, about a year ago on wage theft and setting up a wage theft coordinator, dealing with what I think is a non-controversial issue of pay people what they're supposed to pay, don't steal their wages. You know, I don't think that's too controversial. But I think we wanted, as the testimony will say, just to make sure it meets all legal requirements so we don't run into problems down the line. So with that, whoever would like to go first, Ms. Miller, you want to go first?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman Greenlee and members of the Special Committee on Law and Government. My name is Crystal Miller. I'm the Director of Benefits and Wage Compliance Unit in the Mayor's Office of Labor. For the purposes of wage theft prevention, I also serve as the wage theft coordinator provided for in the city code. Accompanying me today is Manny Citron, the Chief of Staff in our office. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in favor of this bill. Bill number 171113 will update Chapter 9-4300, Wage Theft Complaints, to further define the wage theft coordinator's duties and resolve issues in enabling language which has caused the administration to be able to fully implement the existing ordinance. Briefly, our intended process to make a determination on the validity of the wage theft complaint conform to what is outlined in Chapter 9-4300. However, after careful review of this enforcement strategy in consultation with the city's law department, it was determined that the chapter required technical adjustments to enable proper enforcement. These amendments clarify the role of the wage theft coordinator in reviewing wage theft complaints and determining remedies, and set out a clear process for an employer to seek an appeal before a separate administrative body, the Board of Labor Standards. The wage theft coordinator will now be solely responsible for the initial review and deposition of wage theft complaints, while the city's existing Board of Labor Standards is empowered to independently review any appeals that arise. I'd like to thank you, Councilman Greenlee, for working with us on these amendments and supporting them. With these changes in place, the administration looks forward to fully implementing the ordinance and ensuring that all Philadelphians are protected in their ability to collect wages that they have rightfully earned. We are in full support of this bill, and I am available to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Huda, you'd like to...
Good morning,
morning.
members of the committee and Councilman Greenlee. My name is Nadia Hevka. I'm an attorney at Community Legal Services, and we are here to urge the passage of Bill 171113. As Ms. Miller just described, these are technical amendments to clarify the powers of this office. I have submitted written testimony, so I'm not going to read it here, but I'm available to answer questions. And just to say that from our perspective, the most important thing is that Philadelphians have somewhere to go to deal with these issues in a clear, quick, streamlined way, and that's our interest here, and that's what we think these amendments will do. So we also worked with the office, with your office, and with the law department to come up with these amendments, and we are in full support of those.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the work you all do. Mr., did you want to say something, or you just...
Just here for moral support. if
Okay,
needed.
very good.
Or any questions?
Okay, great. Just one thing, Ms. Huga, and you mentioned in your written testimony, the idea that some of these violations can be small or large, and I think it's important, and I know this had come up in some conversation, that there be flexibility on what kind of penalties can be given out, and certainly if they're particularly egregious, license revocation may be necessary. It's not something that's going to happen all the time, but if it's particularly egregious, that it probably makes some sense to do that.
Correct. We see in our experience in years of representing individuals that are harmed by wage theft, sometimes it's an error, but sometimes it is a purposeful act that can affect multiple individuals in an egregious way. So we do believe that the office needs flexibility to impose the penalties that it believes are appropriate, whether it's monetary penalties or license revocation, if appropriate.
Great. Again, thank you for all the work you do on this issue. Any other questions or comments? Record will reflect that Councilwoman Bass, member of the committee, is present. Anyone else here to testify on Bill number 171113? Seeing none, all right, keep going here. Our next bill and resolution, please. Thank you very much.
Bill number 170716, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified electors of the City of Philadelphia the proposal set forth in a resolution approved by council proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter relating to the operating budget and providing for mandatory minimum annual appropriation to the Police Advisory Commission or any successor body or bodies, and authorizing the appropriate officers to publish notice and to make arrangements for the special election, all under certain terms and conditions. And Resolution 170743, resolution proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter relating to the operating budget and providing for a mandatory minimum annual appropriation to the Police Advisory Commission or any successor body or bodies, and providing for the submission of the amendment to the electors of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Ms. Marconi, why don't you call the name of the first three witnesses so we can get started here.
Rob DeBoe, Anthony Race, who is here for Hans Manos, and Brian Abernathy.
Okay, thank you. Rob, why don't you go first, please?
Morning, Councilman Greenlee, members of the Committee on Law and Government. My name is Rob Dubo, Director of Finance. I'm here to testify on Bill number 10716. The proposed ordinance provides for the submission to the voters of a charter change providing for a $500,000 minimum annual operating budget for the Police Advisory Commission. The administration is generally opposed to setting guaranteed minimum appropriation levels for any agency. We believe those appropriation levels should be determined during the budget process, and that guaranteed minimums reduce the flexibility that elected officials have in setting the city's funding priorities. We also understand, however, there are some oversight agencies for which it may be desirable to provide the independence provided by having a level of funding that cannot be cut. We believe the Police Advisory Commission fits this narrow definition, and as a result, we support this ordinance. That concludes my testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions council might have.
Okay, thank you, sir. Who would like to go? Is there a race?
It's Arachi.
Arasi.
Anthony
Okay,
Arachi.
sorry. Okay, please.
Good morning, Councilman Greenlee and members of the Committee on Law and Government. My name is Anthony Arachi, and I'm the Chief of Staff of the Police Advisory Commission for the City of Philadelphia. And I'm here to testify in support of Bill number 170716 and Resolution number 170743, introduced by Council President Clark, which would amend the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter to require an appropriation in each annual operating budget of $500,000 or such greater amount as Council decides to the Police Advisory Commission. The PAC would like to thank both Council President Clark and Councilman Jones for their continued leadership on this legislation, as well as their commitment to other initiatives which focus on social justice and the quality of life for underserved Philadelphians. The Police Advisory Commission is grateful for your support and partnership and looks forward to many years of collaboration and open communication. Cities around the country have responded to frayed police-community relationships and high-profile incidents involving police with increased oversight, both internal to police departments and via civilian oversight boards. And Philadelphia is no exception. Some form of police oversight has existed in the city of Philadelphia since 1958, but the current Police Advisory Commission was established in 1993 by Mayor Rendell via Executive Order 893. Since then, the primary mission of the Police Advisory Commission has been to improve the relationship between the police and the community. The PAC was empowered to audit individual complaints investigated by the police department, as well as review policy and practice in order to advise the managing director and the police commissioner. While the PAC has been empowered to review policy and practice in the past, in reality, it has focused more on specific incidents. In recent years, this focus and limited resources have led to the Police Advisory Commission to being less effective than it could be in its mission and less visible to the public. That changed in 2017 when Mayor Kenny issued a new executive order which guides the work of the Police Advisory Commission. This order allowed for a focus on the policy, practice, and customs of the Philadelphia Police Department. It suggested that the PAC be guided by the 2015 Department of Justice report and the report from President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Moving forward, the PAC will continue to focus on issues which the public, government officials, and the police department identify as important. We will do so by attempting to understand what policy, practice, and custom influences or causes an unfavorable outcome. With additional resources, the PAC can increase staff and undertake more projects, engaging the public more often and engaging the police department more thoughtfully. Our hope is to produce more substantive reports which can identify issues and solutions to problems that exist or any problems we might anticipate. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. This concludes my testimony, and I'll happily respond to any questions you might have at this time.
Thank you. You testifying too? No, just there for okay. Brian, no? Okay, we just have these two. Any questions for, I think Councilman O had his light on first. Councilman?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Director of Finance, Rob DeBoe, just some questions for you.
Sure.
You said in general, the administration does not want to create mandatory funding for agencies and entities and departments. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in this case, you are saying that you agree for the creation of a mandatory minimum of $500,000 for the operation of the Police Advisory Commission.
Right, that's right.
What are you funding? What do you expect to happen from this funding? What is the result of this funding?
We expect the result of this to be that the Police Advisory Commission is guaranteed a minimum amount of funding. It's 500,000 set out, and that will give them a certain amount of independence that a commission like the Advisory Commission needs.
So I was on the Police Advisory Committee when Mayor Rendell created it, and I believe it has an important purpose. Unless something's changed, however, there is an internal affairs investigation. If they find that the officer did something wrong, typically the Police Advisory Commission does not get involved. If the internal affairs finds they didn't do something wrong, civilians can then bring a complaint to the Police Advisory Commission or file a lawsuit. If they bring it to the Police Advisory Commission, typically because a lawyer is not picking up the case or it's part of their strategy, the police officer appears before the Police Advisory Commission represented by someone from the FOP Lodge 5, typically. And then there is a kind of a hearing, and then a decision is made. But to my knowledge, and this may be appropriate for you as well, but I'm still really focused on the finance director. To my knowledge, the recommendation of the Police Advisory Commission can be disputed by the police officer and his union representative. It then goes to arbitration, labor relations. Is that correct?
Pretty much.
Councilman, is it okay if I respond to that question?
Yes.
The disciplinary process in the police department occurs largely outside of the Police Advisory Commission. You're mostly correct in terms of process, but that's internal to the police department. Internal investigations and complaints of misconduct go through a defined process and forum for decision making. The current iteration of the PAC doesn't adjudicate individual cases of officer misconduct. And to your point, the question of financing, what that would finance is the ability for the citizens of Philadelphia and the Police Advisory Commission to impact the police department constructively and sort of in a larger umbrella, right? The policy and practice part influences outcomes before outcomes occur, especially negative ones. That's the hope.
I appreciate that. I think it's an important purpose.
Sure.
But I'd like to ask the finance director, why this as opposed to so many other things? Are you okay with putting a charter change in to create a mandatory minimum? Why not some other agencies or departments or initiatives or causes? Why this one, $500,000? I mean, can I do a charter change and put $2 or $3 million into something I think is important?
Looks like the councilman wants to respond.
If you don't mind, Councilman, I'd like to, as an author and submitting this along with Council President, to give you some of the intent as to why, if that's okay.
That's fine, but it makes the finance director look bad, but it's okay.
Do you mind, Rob, if I jump in?
I'm happy to have you.
Thank you. And he's a constituent, so
Yes.
it's okay. So let's go back a little bit. The Police Advisory Committee under your service and under Rendell was an executive order. And that meant pretty much that the then mayor, Ed Rendell, felt that it was a worthwhile activity to go into. And that was continued in under the Nutter administration and now into the Kenney administration. But suppose someone else would have won that did not feel that police community relations, that a public way that citizens who felt wrong could come in and actually have their complaint heard, investigated, and then dealt with. So suppose someone who did not feel that way and said, I choose not to extend this executive order any further and shut that door forever. So it was felt by the president of council and myself and other members of council that we needed to have a more permanent and more formal way and then fund that entity. It's okay to say we have an advisory council, but if you can't investigate, if investigations take 2 years on average to do, which it was under your time there, what's the point? And so if we're going to be real and post-Ferguson, and Philadelphia is not Ferguson, our community relations, our relationships with police and community are far better, but we wanted to stay ahead of that curve. And so that we wouldn't, on a bad day, on a bad summer, fall into a Ferguson state. So this is to reinforce the fact that no matter what the whims of mayors who come and go, there is a permanent way for citizens to be able to express their feeling, their complaint as to how they were treated at 2 in the morning. It also, on the other end, helps police officers have a way to say what I'm accused of is not true and that this is unfair to me and my reputation. So it allows for a non-governmental, in the sense of being a part of the police department, but citizen-driven process that we can have these kinds of open, transparent investigations. And the $500,000 charter change assures that into the future so that when Rob DeBoe runs for mayor, he can't just change that. And
You want to put on record something real fast,
clear.
right? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not
Councilman, you
done.
still- Okay, all right. I did not recognize you.
No, thank you. I just, sponsored the bill, and I appreciate everything you said, Councilman Jones. I understand the good purpose. I thought that the opportunity for the Police Advisory Commission was to create a bridge between the community and the police, to have better relations, better understanding. But typically, the Police Advisory Commission is basically a place where people complain about police misconduct. I don't know, like where we're going in the future. The only reason, not that that's a bad thing to do. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do. I just don't know it's an effective thing to do. Police officers come in, they are represented by their union, they have an allegation against them, they typically have been cleared by internal affairs, so they come in very hostile. Not saying there's anything wrong with civilians or people bringing complaints. They can sue in court, and they can sue the city, but this ends up typically in an arbitration, mandatory arbitration, things like that. So my question is, because I'd like to know that the $500,000 is being well used, and that this isn't just a whim to satisfy people in the spur of the news, and put in something where we're going to fund something and we're not sure why we're funding it. As we look at a real estate tax increase later this year, school funding, and a whole bunch of other things that we have got to fund, that we're going to raise taxes on, and we're not going to fund a whole bunch of other things. We're going to cut a lot of funding for things. I just want to be clear that you have already, obviously, figured out what you're cutting, what you're not cutting, and what you're putting money into.
Mr. Abernathy, you want to answer?
Councilman Brian Abernathy, Deputy Managing Director. To your initial question, which is, did something change from between Mayor Rendell's executive order and today? And the answer is yes, something has changed. I think we also, like you, recognize that the individual complaints and the individual investigative process oftentimes ran contrary to the police department's own disciplinary process. That's not to say the current PAC can't investigate individual claims, but their focus is really on policy and practice. We recognize that there are policies and practices within the department that affects our community relations, that affects our ability for the public to trust the police department. And the PAC is designed to really investigate those matters, to make recommendations to the commissioner and to the managing director on what policies could change, on what practices could change on a very kind of on-the-boots ground level. And so while we still certainly expect citizens to make individual complaints, the focus and really what this $500,000 is going to be directed towards is going to be at data analytics, at policy research and best practice research across the country. And I'm actually very excited about the Mayor Kenny's executive order and what it could do for the police department.
All right, thank you for that explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Council President Clark, you...
Well, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Real briefly, I just wanted to address a couple of things, and good morning to the panel. Councilman Jones and I sat down some time ago, and actually Councilman Jones had introduced something maybe a couple of years ago, but at that point, so this, and I know the way I do business, we tend not to respond to a particular news article, or something in the press about a particular issue. This was something that was an ongoing situation. With respects to the purpose, and actually one of our witnesses had be called away from him, but it was an interesting conversation with this particular person, and hopefully she will get here, about the Police Advisory Commission, and the most significant part of that conversation had to do with a proactive approach as it relates to community policing. And I know Hans, when I met with Hans, he talked about the willingness and the need to have police out in communities, so we don't even get to a point where there's this quote-unquote article in the paper because of some incident that happened, because somebody got up on the wrong side of the bed that particular morning and it just escalated into a shooting. So it's not just simply in response to a police shooting or police abuse or whatever may happen that will garner that news article. It's the ability to get out in neighborhoods and to make sure that the relationship between police and the general community is strong, as it should be, because at the end of the day, they have to take an oath to protect and serve. With respects to the budget, and I actually had, my staff had a conversation with Mr. DeBoe, who is the chief bean counter. He is always concerned about mandated revenue streams to a particular department, and I agree with him, because the last thing we need to do is to put a bunch of charter changes in setting a minimum floor as it relates to budgets for particular departments, because it's just not the good, from my perspective, a good way to do business. So we did note that this particular provision is consistent with other oversight provisions that are currently in the charter. Right now, the city controller's office is an oversight entity as it relates to city workers and dollars that are spent. They don't have a specific number, but it says in the charter they must be given the appropriate dollar figure to operate that particular department because of its oversight capacity. If we as council do not appropriate that dollar amount, they can actually go to court and force us to do that. Similarly, the ethics board, when we passed that legislation a few years ago, I believe Councilman Nutter was the prime sponsor, it mandated a certain amount of dollars because of the oversight capacity. There are a couple of other departments in the city, but the consistent thing with respect to all of those is that it has an oversight capacity. If you look at the chart that we didn't necessarily provide today, the dollar figures, as Councilman Jones has said, has fluctuated over a period of years. The executive orders have fluctuated over the period of years. And at some point, hopefully, we'll get to a point where there's a consensus on legislation that charterizes the actual entity. But at this point, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate resources for whatever work that department does. So if you need somebody to hold a meeting, if you need somebody to investigate a particular claim within the jurisdiction of that department, the appropriate revenue is there. So that's what this is about, nothing less, nothing more. And we agree with your issue with respect to mandating revenue streams, Mr. DeBoe, so you can, rest easy that you won't see a charter change every week, mandating revenue for a department. Hopefully we won't do that.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Okay, all right. And record, please reflect Councilwoman Blackwell is also present. No other questions for this panel? Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Marconi, who else we have?
Rochelle Bilal, Michael Cord, and Minister Rodney Muhammad.
I think the other two names that were called are not
Yeah.
present.
Miss Bilal, she called, she's meeting with
Okay, she had.
someone, she's trying to get here as soon as she can.
Okay. Is there anyone else here who wants to testify in this bill, other than the Minister Muhammad? None? Okay, all right. Please, sir, identify yourself and proceed.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you all for allowing me to come and testify with respect to the resolution number 170743. I'll just briefly read from a statement I have, but I want to, set a context for the age that we live in.
Yeah, sure.
Is an age where justice is highly organized and funded, and the cry and the fight for justice is too often disorganized and defunded. And I cite an article that just popped up today in the Daily News. I call it usual suspects. Generally, when police are fighting a crime, they may open up a book of mugshots of people that they feel are inclined to certain types of crime. And I understand that they want to be effective at crime fighting. A lot of time they find repeat offenders, etc. It looks like the public needs to have a list of usual suspects as it relates to law enforcement, people who are inclined to frame people, to testify under oath falsely and bear false witness against their neighbors. So we live in a time where lies and falsehood too often are highly organized. Truth and justice is poorly disorganized and defunded. I support the resolution to amend the Home Rule Charter, resolution number 170743, at a minimum of $500,000 annually for this civilian oversight of policing in the city of Philadelphia. The Police Advisory Commission, as it's known, should have funding appropriated annually, and I have listed my thoughts and reasonings why. This commission will have to bring structural and cultural change in the city of Philadelphia. The origin of police or policing in America really had little to do with public safety. It had more to do primarily, and in most cases, the sole task was the police job was the pursuit, to recapture runaway slaves. This set up a model at the onset of policing in America of how people of color would be policed. Fleeing the cruelties of slavery was considered a crime, since the slave was deemed property. Another thought I had was the patterns drawn from studies indicate that there's a great inclination in this country to approach, arrest, and prosecute people of color and the poor. This being, you can expect to encounter police because of the color of your skin and the zip code that you live in. Rather than seeking criminals now, Philadelphia police or policing has chosen to criminalize you by race or socioeconomic status. Another thought I had was that those who are opposed to more progressive values tend to be heavily resourced and are currently campaigning to make law House Bill number 27 in Harrisburg. This legislation undermines Philadelphia police policy governing encounters where police shoot and or kill a civilian. The Philadelphia Fraternal Order of Police approached State Representative Martina White to submit
this bill, which was originally numbered 1538. Once it was vetoed by Governor Wolf, efforts to have this legislation reintroduced is underway. They've changed the number of the bill to 27. And in short, you know, for the benefit of you that are listening, it just means that if a police shoots, wounds, and or kills somebody, we don't have to know who they are unless they're charged with a crime. And if the DA is cozy with the police, they may never get charged with a crime, so we'll never know who they are. In my estimation, that's a secret police force. So these forces are sustained they're sustained by continual funding to wage their campaigns, whether it's citywide or statewide, so they can sustain their fight. This Commission of Police Oversight should not be weakened because of zero funding. Finally, public safety has been for some time now nearly better than 1/3 of the city's annual budget. The neglect of critical areas of needed attention in the life of citizens in our city cost Philadelphia more in what we call the misery index, meaning that if we fail to fund things on the front side of life, then we end up paying a misery tax on the other end. And we're currently in that, where Philadelphia, because of sustained abuses from law enforcement, there are sustained payouts as the result of lawsuits totaling in the millions of dollars that taxpayers have to pay. If we can go in our pocket to pay for abuses, we can go in our pocket to pay to strengthen a commission to do something about those abuses, because they have not abated despite whatever internal apparatus Philadelphia Police Department has. It does not seem to have put a check and a balance on abuses. And so the neglect of these critical areas of needed attention in the life of citizens in our city costs Philadelphia more in the misery index. That's crime, arrest, prosecution, incarceration, and recidivism. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilman O, you.
Yeah, I just would like to make a comment. First, I have great respect for you,
Yes.
Minister Rodney Muhammad. I try to work with you every chance I get. I do
Yes,
have
sir.
to disagree with your statements, and I would like to just say why.
Sure. Which one? All of them?
Not all of them. Clearly, listen, the criminal justice system needs work, needs reform, but from my perspective, living at 58th and Cobbs Creek, one of the poorer neighborhoods that have a high rate of recidivists who live in the community. Dumping is a common problem, prostitution, drug dealing, assaults, rapes, and other things. The issue that I've always faced is the lack of policing. The fact that the people in the community call the police continuously and would want better service. Because there is a lot of crime, more service, more courteous service, more responsive service. And while there are problems, I have to say I truly appreciate those men and women who take up the calling of being public safety officers, peace officers, police officers. I believe by and large, the largest majority try to do a good job. I agree, there's always problems that have to be rooted out, perhaps ignorance, perhaps intentional. But I don't want to vilify the entire police department. I think the greatest problem I've seen, me personally, I'm just sharing my personal experience, is not police who are going overboard to hurt people. It's police who are so discouraged that when they get a call about an assault or someone breaking into a home, or someone calls and says, someone's in my home, they don't want to respond. I know many police officers who say, you know what, I get paid, I'm in the street, but why should I run in and risk my life when everything is against me? And I would really want to encourage them to do a good job. And, listen, we have different opinions. I know those who are, just against the police and police officers. But certainly, I appreciate what you're saying. I really can't just sit here and say nothing about it. I really appreciate our police. I have seen problems. I've experienced problems myself growing up in that neighborhood. But I would like to say that while I'm not 100% clear on this mandatory funding, it will go out of committee. I'll vote for it out of committee, and we'll take it into a bigger forum. I appreciate what you're saying, and I hope you're not offended by what I'm saying.
No, and I'm not offended at all. We're not trying to smear an entire police department. Unlike many of us that get up and go to work, these are people that get up and go to work, and they could encounter something that they'll never return home to their families. There's a very dangerous aspect of the job. But nevertheless, I'm first a minister, and there have been times that there have been complaints against people that were in my mosque. When I investigated in a just way. And if there are members of my own society that we find that are wrong, we have to check that. Too often in Philadelphia, too often in Chicago, where I'm from, and other cities, obviously, throughout America, there's not a willingness in our own police department, even though we're paying people who are in departments to do just that, there's an unwillingness to check what's wrong. I live in a city where they say, well, we got to catch people with drugs, we got to catch people with guns. Not one gun runner has been arrested in the 26 years that I've lived in Philadelphia. You know what that tells me? With the money that we're paying in for law enforcement, there's no focus to catch the gun runners. We only want to catch the people after they get the guns in the neighborhood. So, I'm all for fighting crime, and I think that the citizens of Philadelphia of every color deserve to have appropriate police response when someone reports a crime and they're responding. But there's a rogue element, and I think everyone that talks about the police, even some of the more virulent voices in our society, they don't condemn all police. It's just not that way. But we can't distinguish when a rogue element is allowed to run. When you're spending $8 to $10 million almost every year paying out claims for police abuses, that's very real. That's very sustained. These are people who are earning a salary and pensions and that. And the first people who know who they are the people that work with them. But they're just not willing to check them. And we need a system. I'm not even interested in a police advisory commission if all they're going to do is advise. It needs some teeth. We need to get some people off the force. We need to get, and if they're not willing to get them off the force, we need to have some teeth to change commands that keep them on the force. But we have to do something, because if a man can carry a gun, and that's already a danger, and I'm a minister over a mosque where we carry no weapons, and I know that we are trained. We go in the community with a moral imperative. I get people who carry guns, and they call me to contract some of the brothers from our mosque to do security, knowing we don't carry guns, and they got guns. They understand there's another a force to work with, but I'm saying if you have commands that allow these people to stay on, if you have internal affairs that I don't know what kind of affair they're having, but these people are able to prevail and stay on the force, and they not only have a gun, they got a badge, they got authority. we need more than people who are angry with bullhorns talking about this. We need real commissions that can do real things and call these people out until they're taken off the force. If we have to do it one by one, that's good. But the good police officer is going to wear the stain of the bad ones. Unfortunately, if they're not good enough to say, look, man, you're shaming this uniform, you're shaming this department, and you're shaming this city.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, anyone else here testify on this bill or resolution? I see no one else here to testify. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. Ms. Marconi, will you please call the title, read the title of our last bill today, please?
Bill number 170854, an ordinance amending section 9-804 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Unfair Rental Practices to require good cause for certain residential evictions and to provide for a first option for existing tenants to renew a lease, all under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you. I should have noted for the record, since Ms. Bilal couldn't stay for the hearing, her comments, her statement will be made part of the record in the previous bill. Before we call any witnesses, Councilman Jones, I believe you, as sponsored the bill, you'd like to make a statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of this committee. Unbeknownst to a lot of people in the public, the way good public policy happens is often when an individual complaint comes up, and when that individual complaint you take notice of becomes a pattern. And then when that pattern becomes a problem, we try to address it with good public policy. About a year ago now, one of my constituents came into our office talking to one of our representatives, Crystal Tan, and said that, did I know that an apartment building with over 200 units was being evacuated by a group of investors that figured that this was a good buy in a middle neighborhood and that they could, with moderate improvement, get a windfall of profit. And I am totally for property rights. I'm for the individual capitalist nature to go buy a property and improve it. However, what it doesn't take into account in this case, and in many cases, and I want to thank the Tenants Union for educating me on this subject. When people of good standing, who have lived in an apartment or a dwelling sometimes for 10 years, sometimes for 20 years, and in this case for 32 years, some not ever missing a payment, are asked to leave unceremoniously just because of profit, then we have to step in. When I was working with some of the advocates, some of them I've known for a long time, what they didn't know was that in the early 80s, my soon-to-be wife and mother of my children gave me some good news in our first apartment. I never told you this story. And in our apartment, this was our first apartment, there was no working heat. We had the heat from the oven to heat the apartment. I could not afford, because I was not working, bedroom furniture, so we had the double mattress on the floor. But for me and her, it was a slice of heaven. And she told me at one point that she was going to have my firstborn. And it was wonderful. If I could have stopped time right then, it would have been a perfect day and a perfect situation. But shortly after that, because she had a part-time job and I had no job, we were given notice that that perfect, non-perfect apartment, we had to leave. And we were given a certain date and a certain time, and I cannot tell you the stress that that put on us as a couple, that stress that, not that housing insecurity that you have. Now, juxtapose that was not that building owner's concern or problem. They were in it for the profit, but we had no heat. We had visitors, often of the four-legged kind, and we were put out into the community without knowing where we're going. Now, fast forward that story, we made out okay, but what's happening around the country is that inner cities have been discovered. Philadelphia is no longer a secret. We are strategically located between Washington, D.C., which is the political capital, and the financial capital, which is New York. And when they look at our housing stock, they say, with a little bit of investment, we can get a lot of profit, and damn the people. Everybody's not like that. I met with the apartment association, I met with HAPCO, and 99% of their people are great people that want to do the right thing. But for those people who do not, for those people who do not have Philadelphia roots, for those people who do not understand that in that apartment building, Mrs. Johnson, for a lack of a name, had relationships with people that lasted decades, that she knew what buses to catch to go get her prescriptions and doctor's appointments. That there was one lady who every weekend had dinner with her neighbors, which unbeknownst to her neighbors was the only meal she was going to get that she could count on. Those familiar statuses. When they vacated this property, they did not care that there were veterans in that property. They did not care that there were people with physical disabilities in that property. They did not care. They did not care that family members who lived in that community, who checked on seniors when it was snowing and things like that, will no longer be able to have it. But what, for me as an elected official, and as a politician, I will cop to that title, was one lady who was a single parent said to me on the way out of the building, having packed her goods, said, you know what, I remember voting for you in '07. And I was happy, we tend to like that kind of compliment. And they said, but you know what, where I'm being relocated to is out of your district, and I won't be able to vote for you again. If this was one occasion, it would be too many. But what we're finding is, particularly apartments and others, buildings are now being bought by investors. And they're beginning to take advantage of our depressed real estate. This is a pattern that needs a policy. I was the last elected official in the region to sign on to that Amazon support letter. And there was a reason. And I see Ro in the audience, and she knows the reason. I had concerns when I was in Seattle, because when 50,000 people come to our city, yeah, that's a good thing. 50,000 people making over $100,000, that's a great thing. But what it would do to rental prices in the city of Philadelphia would have catastrophic impact. And I will conclude with this, Mr. Chairman. In 2018, a one-bedroom apartment on average is $1,427 a month. $1,427 a month. And it was said in a news article that in order for a minimum wage person to be able to afford that property, they would have to work 128 hours a week just to afford rent. Now, I'm going to tell you honestly, I'm not for rent control. I don't want to be New York, but I am for good cause. And housing is a human right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Kim, you want to make a statement?
Yeah, very briefly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much to my colleague, Councilman Jones, who's been such a great leader on this just cause issue. I also want to acknowledge all the advocates who are in the audience today, who've been pushing, many of you for decades, to raise up the attention to the 40% of Philadelphians who are tenants in our city. The fact of the matter is that tenants' rights are an area that the city of Philadelphia has a lot of work to do, and we're trying to put our nose to the grindstone on it. I was really proud last year to stand with all the members of City Council to put in and work on a budget line item that would grant legal aid for the very first time to tenants who face wrongful evictions in courts. And as a result of that investment by City Council, which will be really the first time that the city has explored doing things, giving legal aid to people outside the criminal justice system. As a result, there are new court-related services and a change in court laws. That includes the fact that the courts right now are saying that no landlord who does not own a full rental license for a year can evict somebody, and they cannot evict if they have existing violations against them. That is a major step. That's a major step forward that came about because people like you spoke up about your experiences, that you showed yourselves to be beyond the stereotypes and biases that people tend to have when they go into a big issue that too few people understand right now. And we talked about ourselves as parents and grandparents, about longtime neighbors and residents of our cities, that this is touching all aspects of the city. Even in the first month alone here in 2018, more than 300 families have already been evicted from through the courts. So we have to pay attention to this issue. I also want to point out a couple of things, just because we have so many advocates here today, and if this is information you can share, I would really love if you could do it. But thanks to the investment from City Council, we now have a tenant help center expansion. We have a lawyer for a day, so people can reach out, and if they qualify based on income and are scheduled for help, they can meet with a lawyer who can represent them during the process. We're actively recruiting pro bono attorneys, financial counseling, a live tenant assistant hotline for advocates, tenants, and landlords. And a number of other outreach, intakes, and referrals that will all come through the courts. And because it's all housed in the courts, it means that those who are facing eviction don't have to run around and cobble together the resources for themselves. Those resources will now be provided by the City of Philadelphia inside landlord-tenant court, so that the people who need it the most can access it. I really want to thank We have a great opportunity to see a lot more done. We've got a multi-agency task force that is pulled together that is taking a look specifically at the issue of evictions and the types of policies, legislative changes, and resources that are going to need to happen in our city so we can help everybody stay in their home. Thank you so much to our great partners like Community Legal Services, PillCop, Turn, PTU, advocates, Rue Landau from PCHR and the Fair Housing Commission is also here. We have a city that is poised to do some major changes and to take an issue like eviction and to prove that we as a city, if we work together and we're strategic and we're thoughtful about it, and we engage in combination with the advocacy that is coming out of our neighborhoods and communities, we can make some change and make a difference in people's lives right now. Thank you.
Just quickly, just to keep things moving, before I recognize Councilman O, Ms. Marconi, will you please call the first panel so they can be ready to go when we're...
Rue Landau and Rashida Phillips.
Okay, if they could come forward. Record will also reflect Councilman Dom is present. I'm sorry, Councilman O?
Thank you very much. I am going to vote against this bill, and I'm going to explain why for the record, but I would like to be recorded as voting aye on all other bills. Okay. My father was a pastor in the 1950s, and in the early 1960s, when Korean immigrants couldn't find housing, he bought some old buildings, fixed them up, and made them available for free or for cheap. My wife asked me the other day, because we have a apartment upstairs, if I would rent it out to our neighbor who is looking for a place to stay, and I said no. It is not worth it for me, the headache and all the problems, to rent out a place upstairs. I would like to, but we need to fix it. I just wouldn't do it. I believe that there is a legal relationship between the landlord and the tenant that is the cornerstone of two parties making an agreement. The city is very much in favor of tenants, and I appreciate that. That is the history of Philadelphia. It's a good history. However, articulating what is a good cause and what is not a good cause narrows that very much. And I think the end result is that we do have investors who only want to build expensive apartments, condominiums, and others. And quite frankly, the city is a culprit because, for example, while we have discrimination in the building trades, we have an executive order that anyone who does construction must be a member of the building trades. And we have some of the building trades with 98% white men and no diversity. Why? Because of the high wages, and it's wonderful that they're high wages, but then we don't have building moderate and low income housing. We have to bend over backwards to see that. And then when folks come out to build in their neighborhoods and communities, the regulations, the costs, and all the other problems are prohibitive in addition to the politics. Me personally, I don't think it's legal as an attorney. Number two, I don't want to get involved in the relationship between two adults in the tenancy, landlord-tenant situation. And finally, because I think while it's well-intended, I think the end result of it is that it's a chilling effect that more people in communities, poor communities, do not want to be engaged in renting out facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. When it comes to the meeting of the law and government, we will, the committee, you will be recorded aye on all bills except this one where you will be recorded as voting no.
Thank you. I'm sorry. May I be excused?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, easy. All right, really. Councilwoman Bass.
It's all right. Thank you, Mr.
Ho, all right? Nobody else speaks except the person that's recognized, okay? Thank you. Councilwoman Bass. Councilwoman Bass.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to, number one, I want to thank Councilman Jones for working on this issue, very, very important. And, this is not something to be taken lightly. Housing is clearly an issue that, there's a lot of passion around this issue. A lot of folks who feel very strongly about, the ability to have security in your home, whether you own that home or you rent that home. And so I've heard from folks who have felt very strongly that the level of anxiety that comes with being a tenant, not just in Philadelphia, but really anywhere, that you never know what your landlord's intentions are, from year to year, from month to month, whether that person is going to continue to lease the property, whether they want it back, whether they intend to sell. And so there's so many factors that go into housing and making housing secure for all Philadelphians. So I do have some concerns about the bill, some technical concerns, but I will be supportive of this bill today. And spoke with Councilman, I did speak with Councilman Jones, and we are going to work on some amendments on those technical matters. So I think that the bill is great. I think it can be even better, and I look forward to working with the sponsor to make it so. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilwoman. Okay. Now, let's get to the witnesses. Please, Ms. Landau, why don't you start?
Thank you.
Please identify yourself and proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Chairperson Greenlee, Councilperson Jones, and members of the Law and Government Committee for giving me the opportunity to testify in support of Bill number 170854. I'm Rue Landau, Executive Director of the Philadelphia Fair Housing Commission, that agency that enforces the Fair Housing Ordinance.
The Fair Housing Ordinance enacted in 1962 prohibits certain unfair rental practices by landlords and gives the Commission the authority to address unsafe and unhealthy conditions in rental properties through adjudicatory hearings as well as through its investigatory and subpoena authority. This bill would provide good cause for a landlord to issue a notice to terminate or refuse to renew a residential lease solely because the lease term expires. The landlord must have good cause to terminate, which includes but is not limited to the following: habitual non-payment of rent, breach of or non-compliance with the material term of the lease, engaging in nuisance activity that creates a substantial interference with the use, comfort, or enjoyment of the property by the landlord or the tenants, engaging in criminal activity or activities affecting the health and safety, destruction of the property, refusing access to make repairs or inspect the property, the tenant's refusal to execute a similar lease, or refusal of a lease change such as a rent increase, a no-pet policy, or elimination of parking. When the landlord believes good cause to evict exists, the landlord must give the tenant 30 or 60 days' notice, depending on the lease term. A tenant who believes there is not good cause may challenge the assertion by filing a complaint with the Fair Housing Commission or a court of competent jurisdiction within 15 business days of receiving notice. The consequences of eviction for low-income families, many of which are led by single mothers, are severe. And there is no question that evictions are a serious problem in Philadelphia. To address this crisis, Mayor Kenny joined with members of council and a broad array of stakeholders to commission a 27-member eviction task force in September 2017. The task force purpose is to rapidly develop recommendations focused on reducing the number of evictions and developing ways to buffer the effects of eviction on low-income families in Philadelphia. The task force is currently in the midst of its fact-finding on eviction and rental issues and will make formal recommendations for a comprehensive plan to significantly reduce evictions and their deleterious effects. A draft report is due on April 10th. It will be followed by a public input process, and a final report will be issued to council and the mayor by June 15th of this year. As an aside, as a member of the task force, I've been charged with holding certain focus groups for special populations in the city, and I've already done a focus group to hear about the effects of eviction from the LGBTQ community, immigrants, refugees, and limited English speakers, and tomorrow I'm doing one for the disability community as well. With the bill before you today, Councilman Jones has made a truly serious and substantive statement about the problems of eviction. The councilman continues to demonstrate his compassion for our most vulnerable residents, along with his characteristic leadership. I wholeheartedly welcome his voice and his views in this process. The task force draft report is less than 2 months away. In view of that, we encourage ongoing discussion of this bill, engagement between the task force and the sponsor, and a full look at the facts and views presented today, as well as by the task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Landau. Ms. Phillips, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Rashida Phillips, and I'm the managing attorney of the Housing Unit at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify on the Just Cause Protection Bill. Just cause protections are one low-cost tool for anti-displacement that meet a number of important goals and have broader implications, not least among them protection of tenants from unjust, arbitrary, and illegal evictions. According to a recently released study on the effectiveness of such protections, the report states that the goals of just cause eviction laws preserve social and economic diversity, provide tenants with stable and affordable rents, and maintain a variety of housing types. At its core, just cause eviction laws protections require landlords to provide a just or good cause reason prior to evicting tenants. These reasons are typically defined by statute, as Rue just talked about, and many states and hundreds of municipalities have some form of just cause eviction protection, while certain types of federally subsidized and state tax credit leases automatically contain such protections. Since its passage in Santa Monica, a just cause protection known as Measure RR has cut by half all evictions where the basis is for reasons other than non-payment of rent.
As Councilwoman Parker said, long-term stability of housing should be a goal for both homeowners and renters, as the stakes are equally high and the list of collateral consequences equally long when either a homeowner or a renter faces loss of shelter. And while it is true that many landlords in Philadelphia are small mom-and-pop landlords, it is also true that the power dynamic between landlord and tenant tips heavily in favor of the landlord in most relationships, no matter how big or small the landlord is. 85% of landlords using the legal eviction process are able to obtain legal representation to assist with evicting a tenant versus 5 to 8% of tenants who are able to obtain counsel and advice. Just cause eviction can fix this imbalance by providing tenants with a clear written notice that the landlord is seeking to end the relationship based on legally permissible reasons. As the materials from the Philadelphia Tenants Union explain, just cause eviction does not mean that tenants cannot be evicted under any circumstances, or that a landlord has no right to evict, or that it will be harder to evict problem tenants. Just cause helps to clarify and specify under what circumstances a lease termination or eviction is legal and justified. It gives tenants a fair opportunity to understand what the issues with the tenancy are under the terms of the lease, and an opportunity to remedy alleged lease violations as permitted by the terms of the lease. If the tenants don't remedy the issue, or if the tenant is substantially violating the terms of the lease with no remedy available, landlords can exercise their legal right to terminate the lease and evict the tenant as they normally would. We have countless stories of tenants who could have benefited from a just cause eviction protection. Stories of tenants who have faced racial, sexual, gender, family, ethnicity, and disability discrimination from landlords, tenants forced out of their homes due to lack of repairs, stories of tenants intimidated into not complaining about substandard housing conditions that exacerbate health and safety problems, or tenants who received eviction filings from disgruntled landlords that have resulted in virtual blacklisting for future homes and opportunities for stability. Thank you. I could be here for hours telling you stories, and we will hear from tenants in the Philadelphia Tenants Union who will highlight their own stories. Please keep in mind that these experiences are not the exception. They speak for hundreds of others who have been unjustly and violently torn from their homes and communities based on reasons that, if you dig a little deeper, cannot be legally justified, or for reasons that we should no longer stand to justify as a moral and humane society. These experiences and traumas will speak best to why a just cause bill is necessary, and why such protections will help lead the way to creating a more equitable, inclusive, safe, and healthy future for all Philadelphians. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Let me just thank you both. Maybe Ms. Phillips, you might be on the, or either want to answer this. We may hear later from someone, or we've gotten certainly some written testimony, raising some legal issues about the bill. But as you said, there has been numerous municipalities have put similar bills forward. Has there been legal challenges? There's some. I know there was a constitutional question raised. Could you comment on that a little bit? Yeah.
Sure. My office has done research on this issue. There are, as far as we can tell, and as far as we've researched for Pennsylvania, there are no state law preemption issues that would block this bill. Under our state constitution and under the Landlord-Tenant Act, there's nothing there that blocks or places a barrier on us being able to legislate further tenant protections in the city of Philadelphia. Happy to share that research in further detail.
No, I appreciate it. Actually, if you have that, maybe you could send it to us.
Happy
so we'll make it part of the record.
Yep.
Okay? Thank you. Councilman Jones. Councilman Jones, you'd like to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you for giving us solid advice about where we can be helpful. This is going to take, the good news is Philadelphia has discovered the remedy to the unintended consequence is us working together to come up with practical solutions, and they germinated from just regular people who were impacted by this issue. But it needs to be vetted through legal and human relations commission, and working with, I want to recognize Councilman Dom, who may or may not be supportive of this, but was willing to talk about this and to give me good advice and help us to work with HAPCO and the Apartments Association to figure out where we can find common ground. So this is all of our problem. And what I found out was that good apartment owners want good tenants and want to have that revenue come and be predictable. So we're all in this together. And what I don't want, and we went out to Seattle, was when we were out in Seattle, average people did not live in the city. The worker in the hotel, the person in the restaurant, the person parking the car had to travel 1 hour away just to be able to come to work. That was the closest location that many of them could have to get to a $15 an hour job, and had to live 3 and 4 deep in an apartment just to afford the rent. That is a lopsided situation for everyone. So as we come up with the possibility of Amazon coming here, we damn sure better have solutions to these issues.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Dom, you had a question or statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councilman Jones, and thank you for your testimony. I just had a few questions, and by the way, I'm happy to work with Councilman Jones on this topic, and he's been very cooperative. I'm glad to hear that the eviction task force is in place, and by April there'll be some results that maybe this bill and committee can work together to get the results in the right place. I think in general, people are in favor of bills like this that don't hurt the good people and help those who are violating the laws. And the issue here is there's so many things we got to be careful of. As an example, you own an investment property. You rent it out for 10 years. You decide you want to sell it. Under this bill, I don't believe you can end the lease at the ending date, which makes your property very tough to sell. I'm talking about now not a multifamily building. I'm talking about a row home, a condominium, or whatever. It makes it almost impossible to sell. So I just want to make sure we address those issues, okay? Another example, I lease an apartment not in this area to my niece. My brother passed away when he was 44. He had a daughter. And under this bill, I had to terminate a tenant's at the end so my niece could move into the apartment. Under this bill, I couldn't do that because it's immediate family members, not niece. So I think there's all these other issues we've got to be very careful of, because everyone's in favor of those situations where people are not treated correctly, but by the same token, we don't want to hurt the people who follow the rules. So I just want to make sure we cover all those bases. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you
Thank
both
you.
for what you do. Before I recognize Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, Ms. Marconi, why don't you call our next panel, please?
Yeah,
So we
while
keep
the
moving.
next panel is coming up, I want to go on the record to say I can completely support the merits of the bill, and having worked with members in the industry over lead and a number of other related issues, working together, finding what Councilman Jones said, practical solutions really does matter, and we really can get there by being very, very diligent in getting all the voices around the table to come up with a solution that takes care of those where families get misplaced. That's what's so heart-wrenching. Families getting misplaced around the actions of a few who violate the rules. So I look forward to hearing more about the task force and how all parties involved will find a practical win-win solutions, protecting the citizens of this city. And while the panel comes up, I want to do a quick rewind for the record on the sexual harassment bill. And that is, we anticipate that the administration has agreed to submit in writing a letter detailing its commitment to implement sexual harassment training for city employees. And for the record, I need to say that we expect to receive the letter shortly, and we'll submit it to the clerk for inclusion in the official record of this testimony. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman,
Okay, thank
for
you,
that.
Councilwoman. Ms. Marconi, our next panel, please.
Phil Lord, Margaret Nierston, and Jared Smith, Victor Pickney, and Jack Malloy. All right, both representatives of HAPCO and the
Greater Philadelphia Association of Realtors were called. I see they're not here. The Realtors have submitted a testimony that will be made part of the record. Mr. Lord, why don't you start, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Phil Lord. I'm the Executive Director of TURN, a tenant service and advocacy organization, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's actually an honor to be part of this event. I really want to say my appreciation to Councilman Jones for his leadership on this issue, and for all of you who've been supporting this. I think this is a great day for Philadelphia. It's an opportunity to come into the 21st century, to be able to recognize human right to housing in a new and more profound way. When I say that this is important and this is fundamental because the reality is that there is no law, no protection of a tenant that means anything if the tenant could be evicted in 30 days. And the reality is that if we have a situation which we call a termination of term, the reality is that when a landlord wants to put you out, if you have a month-to-month lease, you're out, no matter what the situation is. And the idea that somehow there's going to be protections in that situation are just naive. There's a myth that termination of term means that there's a real reason to evict a tenant that's being articulated. No one ends a lease for no reason. No one ends a lease just because it's up. They end leases because, in fact, they're dissatisfied with something or want to do something. And if they fail or are unwilling to disclose that, we have a problem. And that covers up a multitude of serious violations of the law that otherwise would be recognized. So it's very important that we not allow termination of term to be an excuse for ending a lease when there's sexual harassment, when there's discrimination, when there's retaliation for asking for repairs. All these situations make it so that it's not justified to terminate the lease. And we need to know what those situations are. To get the context correct, you have to understand, I think, what landlord and tenant court is all about. It's not a regular court. It's not a due process court. It's a summary process court. And a summary process court means that a lot of the due process requirements that are part of the normal common pleas court are compromised. And one of the most important ones that are compromised is the requirement of discovery. In landlord and tenant court, there's no opportunity for discovery. And that means you have no opportunity to question who's bringing the suit or the other party to find out what the case is about, why they're bringing it, what's going on, identify issues, work out concerns, even try to settle the case. That's not available in municipal court. And so it compounds the problem when you have termination of term as your reason because we don't know what the real reason is. And if you suspect it's because of discrimination or suspect because of retaliation, you don't have the opportunity to really thresh that out and develop a good case for it. So it is a way to cover up what's really going on. In terms of what's being covered up, I think Matthew Desmond said it well. He said that that eviction is for African-American women, but mass incarceration is for African-American men. And the reality is that eviction is a crisis that creates a downward spiral towards poverty. And we know that in Philadelphia, as well as another number of other large cities, African-American women, especially African-American women with children, are the victims of this process. We have a process that's essentially racist, sexist, and economically exploitative, and that's our eviction process. That's who gets evicted, not rich, wealthy people, but people who are poor, people who are marginalized. And so we have to make sure this process is fair and reasonable. And there's no way in the world that it makes sense to put somebody out of their home for no reason at all, just because the time is up. You know, it's like saying I'm going to end someone's job because of a date and not because of what they did in terms of performance. It's totally unfair. So we're glad for this opportunity to make sure the laws are more effective and to move forward on them. I'd like to say critically that the landlord-tenant relationship is not just a relationship between two parties as has been described. It's a triangulated relationship where the government is involved. Landlords do not evict people. Government evicts people. Sheriffs evict people. People authorized by the court evict people. You, as council people, create laws that allow people to be evicted. And that's a key part of this whole situation. If we have laws that allow people to be evicted for no reason or for reasons that are discriminatory, then we have failed as a society. It's not just the landlord who's failed, but we all have. So I hope that this bill moves forward. We fully support it. We think it's a great step in the right direction. We've been anxious for it to happen for years. We're glad to see it happening now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. Thank you. And your full testimony, appreciate you abbreviating it.
Sure.
And the full testimony will be made part of the record. Okay? All right. Thank you. Please identify yourself and proceed.
morning. Thank you for having us this morning. My name is Margaret Nurston. This is Jarrett Smith, and we are the campaign directors for the Philadelphia Tenants Union. Philadelphia faces an eviction crisis. Since the year 2000, Philadelphia has lost over 1/5 of its affordable housing. In some neighborhoods, eviction affects 15% of renters every year, most notably in council districts 5 and 8. This forced relocation of lower-income tenants in our city is forcing generations of residents into increasingly dangerous neighborhoods with higher rates of violent crimes, unemployment, and poor schools. Eviction is not a victimless crime. This epidemic directly targets Philadelphia families. Out of those evicted each year, 80% of tenants are non-white and 70% are women of color, and having children increases chances of eviction by 3 times.
But let's look at how evictions break down by district. Since 2015, Darrell Clark's 5th District and the 8th District have led the city in evictions over the past 2 years. In these districts, women of color in low-income communities are disproportionately affected. These trends have remained consistent in 2018. Just since the start of this year, there have been 54 writs of possession issued in the 8th District. Also, in the last 3 weeks, 15 residents of one building, the Charter Court Apartments, located within the 8th District, have been issued eviction notices. It is important to note that although these mass evictions by developers of large buildings such as the Penguin House are frequent, 3/4 of all evictions in the past year were by landlords who own 10 units or less. Formal court eviction data fails to even cover the magnitude of the informal evictions throughout our city, which is often underreported due to fear of retaliation. According to data collected by Matthew Desmond, author of the book Evicted, 48% of evictions in his study were informal. The kind of instances where landlords removed doors from their hinges, left bed bugs untreated, or turned off the heat during winter. Tenants are routinely forced to leave, and if they try to complain without good cause protections, they're served with an eviction. It is clear from the data presented that the eviction crisis is gripping our city's most vulnerable communities at alarming rates. With good cause eviction, we will be able to keep Philadelphia families in their homes and give our children the opportunity to succeed. Good cause will promote the stability and allow diverse neighborhoods throughout our city to build stronger and safer communities. Help our citizens do more than just survive, help them thrive. Vote for good cause.
Thank you both. Let me just say very quickly, and Mr. Lord, you and I talked about this issue for a while, and it was, quite frankly, the reason I was hesitant for a while, I could never quite figure out what exactly to call, qualified as just cause, good cause, whatever. And I give Councilman Jones and his people credit for figuring out, I think, a reasonable list that we can always play with words a little bit. But I guess what finally convinced me is if I'm a landlord and I have a tenant that follows the rules and doesn't do any of the things that are in the bill, pays their rent, agrees to a rent increase, and that was our bill that we put together to give proper notice, I guess I'd have to question, why does the landlord want them out? If they're good tenants, what's the point? And I certainly hearing from GPAR and all, with all due respect, I haven't gotten an answer to that. And that's why I think this bill just kind of makes sense. Again, we can, as Councilwoman Bass said, there might be some other amendments, some other words to use, but if I'm a tenant, I'm doing the right thing, and all of a sudden I got to, after 10 years, and maybe I have kids in school and have, a part of a community, and just say, well, you know what, we decided, it's a contract, we've decided to cancel it. It doesn't seem fair, and I think that's what we should be about. And I know that's the councilman's point is, it's about fairness. So that's just a statement, not a question, but if you want to say anything.
Yeah, in my testimony, I had a reference to a client I'm working with who, in fact, had that situation where she actually was walking the landlord's dog and had a great relationship until she had a black boyfriend from London come visit her.
And then all of a sudden, it was a different kind of sense, and
Yeah.
next thing she knew, she was being her lease terminated. So things do change, and change for the wrong reason. And the woman said she denied that was the reason, even though she said it in a conversation. So it's tough when things are
I got you.
not documented.
Yeah, okay, thank you, thank you. No other questions or comments, thank you all very much, okay? Ms. Marconi, I think we have one long panel here, and while they're coming up, I'm going to make a statement. Please call the panel.
Carly Wilson, Karen Harvey, Leon Tyre, Barry Thompson, Sterling Johnson, Jennifer Lynn Avery.
Okay, if you all want to come up, first three get the table, and the other three can sit at the chair, in the black chairs, so we can keep moving. And while you're coming up, if you give me your attention for a minute, in order to get these bills out of committee, including this bill, we need a quorum. Some members have a time issue here, so I would respectfully ask, and I would say it's in your interest because I think you're all supporting this bill, and I think you can count, I think you know where we are here. I would ask you to be brief in your testimony so we can get to the meeting and vote these bills out, okay? Because if we don't have the quorum, we can't vote the bills out. So that's my commercial, and I'll stick to it. Please, whoever would like to speak first. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Hi, I'm Carleigh Wilson, the testing coordinator at the Fair Housing Rights Center in southeastern Pennsylvania. I'm also a resident of Kensington, Philadelphia, and a mother of a 7-month baby. I just want to say that I'm personally disappointed that Councilman O isn't here to hear my testimony, because I was definitely hoping that he would be able to hear me and the others out, because we all can make points that could possibly change people's minds. That's what democracy is all about. So I've come to today's hearing with a great concern for the good cause legislation. The Fair Housing Rights Center, located at the intersection of Spring Garden and 3rd Streets, works daily to fight housing discrimination in the city of Philadelphia as well as surrounding counties. Our work is made difficult by an eviction crisis for several reasons. First, we have a very low capacity to manage an issue that is so widespread in a city that has been and continues to be a major HUD for housing providers who choose to participate in housing discrimination. 2, we do not receive any funding from the city of Philadelphia to do our job. This lack of funding causes us to allocate resources into educating residents about their fair housing rights. However, tenants are afraid to exercise their rights in fear of retaliation from their landlords. Landlords in Philadelphia are not required to receive compliance training in fair housing laws, so they are unaware about their responsibilities under the Federal Fair Housing Act, more formally referred to as the Civil Rights Act of 1968. By not training landlords in fair housing, the city of Philadelphia is essentially giving them a green light to engage in discriminatory practices. Number 4, the volume of calls that the Fair Housing Rights Center receives in response to discrimination complaints is too large for us to mitigate, given our capacity is low and funding streams are low. At FHRC, we receive a lot of complaints regarding unfair evictions and home seekers who cannot find housing because they have an eviction determination on their record. Please note that a significant portion of the eviction determinations are either erroneous, meaning it's just false, or they only reflect an appearance in landlord-tenant court rather than an actual eviction. When we receive these calls, staff is frustrated with the fact that we cannot help them because there is currently no legislation in Philadelphia that protects tenants from this pattern of practice. However, we are concerned about any practice in the housing industry that targets any protected class under the Federal Fair Housing Act. The protected classes identified by the Fair Housing Act are race, color, religion, gender, national origin, disability, and familial status. Arica Hurst, who's sitting behind me, is our intake specialist at FHRC, and she was able to gather intakes from 2017 that reflect complaints that we received regarding unfair evictions in Philadelphia, as well as home seekers who are unable to secure safe and reasonable housing in Philadelphia because of their eviction record. All but 3 of these intakes are from women of color, and most of the women have children. This pattern of unfairly evicting women of color with children imposes a disparate impact on members of 3 protected classes under the Federal Fair Housing Act, which are race, gender, and familial status. Ms. Joanne is Hispanic.
All right, ma'am, if I could just interrupt you, because, I know you have the whole list. That will be made part of the record, if we could conclude the testimony, because we're really running into a time issue here.
The majority of the people who call the Fair Housing Rights Center with complaints about an unfair eviction or they cannot find housing because of their eviction record are women of color, and they are women with children.
Okay.
These are the only intakes that we have had time to gather information for from 2017. However, we regularly receive these calls from folks who are unable to secure reasonable housing because of their tenant record. Unfortunately, we can't refer these calls to anyone who can help because there's currently no legislation that protects families from this treatment. We know that there are a lot more families who are experiencing this same treatment who haven't called us for various reasons. We implore you to pass this legislation so that FHRC will be able to help Philadelphians resist housing discrimination and continue to reside safely in their homes.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Who would like to go next?
Good afternoon. My name
More into the microphone, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better? Okay. My name is Karen Harvey. I'm a physically disabled and now retired social worker. For more than 35 years, I provided clinical and administrative social work services to the indigent and low-income consumers of the Philadelphia behavioral health care system. I am currently the secretary of the Philadelphia Tenants Union. In 2010, I moved into the Penguin House located in the Winfield Heights area of this city. Once a beautifully maintained high-rise apartment, by 2012, the building had begun to fall into disrepair. In 2013, that once beautiful building came under the management of Stonehenge Management. In December 2016, I and all other tenants received a letter slid under our doors informing that the building had been sold, was closing, and our leases would not be renewed. The letter from the new owners, Cross Properties, thanked us for our tenancy and wished us well. There was no mention of, nor was my request honored, for rent allowance to help defray moving expenses, given the short length of time, 2.5 months, in which I would need to secure other living arrangements. In April, notices were posted of a meeting for tenants with the Philadelphia Tenants Union to hopefully help soon-to-be displaced tenants with their housing issues. Specifically, we were to be informed of our rights as tenants. By the time of the second meeting, Penguin Management had begun to employ tactics to deny us the right to meet, the most egregious of which was their calling the police on us as they denied us our right to meet in the common lobby area. In May, Cross Properties and Stonehenge Management began landlord-tenant court proceedings against myself and all other residents remaining in the building. On court documents were listed false amounts of rent past due, and each tenant was charged, on average, more than $700 in legal fees and court costs, adding further to our trauma and financial hardship. Finally, in July, I found a home and moved in August of 2017. Had good cause legislation existed during the Penguin saga, I feel certain that I and numerous other Penguin tenants would have been spared the most arduous experience of the fear of impending homelessness. I implore City Council members to vote favorably on the good cause bill being presented today so that others might be spared this horrific ordeal. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please begin your testimony.
Peace and blessings. My name is Frederica Lightford, and I'm here to just basically state that in April 2016, I was displaced from my home in South Philadelphia, in the 1200 block of South Ringgold Street, after residing there for 9 years. The landlord sold all of her properties because of the increase of property taxes. I was given 60 days to vacate the premises, and to say the least, my family and I were devastated. The search for a new dwelling became more than a job, it was a fight. Property owners weren't who they claimed to be, and after searching for 6 months, I finally found an apartment complex in West Mount Airy. However, after residing there for only 2 months, I found the apartment in series of violations, and when brought to the owner management's attention, I was asked to leave and would receive my security deposit without penalties if things weren't plain sailing for me. This invitation was extended on several occasions.
Needless to say, I would deduct a portion of my rent with proper legal protocol in reference to matters that deem necessary. Most of these violations were at-risk issues concerning matters of safety, such as getting stuck on elevators, active water lingering behind the walls of the unit from exterior damages of the cornice of the building, smoke detectors, which are actively covered as we speak now, with plastic bags in various parts of the building without certainty, tenants being exposed to gas leaks, and one possible death that may have occurred because of this negligence. My lease renewal was received 2 weeks ago, and it indicated that I wouldn't be able to deduct from my rent if the elevators were to malfunction or become inoperable because it's not their fault. One of my neighbors that has resided in the building for 13 years received that same addendum. She signed the lease but was not in agreement with not being able to deduct rent should the elevators fail mechanically and become inoperable, and her lease was not renewed. I faced the same dilemma, an illegal eviction, because of my choice to speak up and speak out for the injustice that is inflicted upon the stereotypical ne'er-to-do-well folk. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Who are the next group to speak? Please take a seat. Thank you for your patience. Pull the mic close to you. State your name for the record, please.
Sterling Johnson.
Please proceed.
Great. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Sterling Johnson. I'm a resident of Philadelphia. I'm a Fiddler Square. I'm also work at mental health partnerships, so I see people with behavioral health conditions, and about 50% of our calls are people with housing issues. Philadelphia has a housing crisis, eviction crisis. We know that. We see people, especially in neighborhoods like North Philadelphia and West Philadelphia, being at risk of the housing markets in those neighborhoods, because we know they're both at 15%. And especially when we're at this overdose crisis, we're seeing that the stress is also putting people in a bad way. And after that, finding new housing is near impossible. I can speak from my own personal experience that there is discrimination for poor people and people of color getting new housing in a hot rental market. You don't have the credit, you have a disability, and the City Council should consider the harms that come from this. And I did just want to support what Councilman Jones said in terms of the actual experience of people in different cities around the country. In my experience, places like Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, the reasons that their income has gone up is because people were displaced. People are not there. So the incomes have gone up, but it's because they replace usually poor black people with white rich people. And that is what's happened. That's happening in our city. And none of us will be here, and it'll happen quickly if we do not do something about it. Because the people that are here will not be here. The housing market does not support people with disabilities. They are easily displaced and replaced with people that are richer. We have to take steps to what is potentially a hot rent speculation market to actually, is just the responsible decision to curb it, because the possibility for cruel and antisocial actions on this are very high. And what the people that it falls on the backs are people with disabilities, women of color, people with children. That is what should be done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Before this gentleman speaks, is there anyone else here who wants to testify? Guys,
keep in mind,
we're running into time issues here now. We're going to lose a quorum. You're not going to get the bill through, okay? I'm not trying to stop anyone from testifying. I'm just being honest now, okay? Sir?
Hi, good afternoon. The City of Philadelphia knows that there is an eviction crisis in the City of Philadelphia.
Sorry, can you state your name?
My name is, I'm getting ready to do that. Hi, everyone. My name is Barry Thompson, and I have personally been a victim of unlawful eviction.
I've been threatened by a landlord who was forced to move for fear of my life. The landlord of the building I was forced to move in was no better and called the cops on me, claiming that I had a gun when I tried to approach him with union members to address rental issues. Even though I am still not stable with my own housing, I continue to fight for tenant rights. A year ago, I participated in a town hall meeting in Germantown where Councilperson Gim and Bass challenged those in attendance to take grassroots action on eviction crisis. I am here today because of that challenge and have worked with tenants across the city to support good cause. Good cause legislation is a preventive measure for combating displacement and potential homelessness in the city. This amendment to the unfair rental practice laws will prevent no-fault evictions at the end of the lease term and gives tenants an opportunity to contest a good cause for eviction before the courts. These no-cause evictions continue to happen all the time, such as the current case of Joan Wildhaus and her 6-month pregnant daughter, Heather. Joan, a recovering advocate and member health worker, has never missed a rent payment in 4 years. She lived in her apartment, and her landlord filed an eviction complaint on the grounds the lease was terminated. Without good cause legislation, tenants such as Penguin residents or Joan and Heather are faced with homelessness and often as little as a month. We want to thank Councilman Jones and his co-sponsors Helen Gim and Sherelle Parker for bringing this bill to the floor. And I am pleading with City Council to take this bill into high consideration. This bill will help to tackle the eviction crisis we now face in Philadelphia. We thank you for allowing us to bring this bill before you, and we hope with these testimonies you have heard today, it will open up the hearts and touch the minds of this committee to bring this bill to action. Good cause, no eviction without good cause. To the Philadelphia Union. Good cause, no eviction without good cause. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe you should just tell them we need to vote.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to vote this good cause legislation out.
You want to vote today? You want to vote today? All right, okay.
Here's your amendment right here.
Where is it?
No one else here to testify on the bill? No one else?
Where's it at?
This is the amendment right here.
So where's this?
I'm respectfully asking everybody to please be quick because we're going to lose a quorum and you're not going to get the bill out of committee, all right? I'm trying to be honest with you. Please.
Thank you, Council. My name is Andre Butler, and I'm with TURN. And I want to, number one, thank you, Councilman Greenlee, for your continued support to work with us at TURN on various housing issues dealing with tenants' rights. And everyone that is in the room today, since this testimony is going into the record, I just want to know that for the council people who might be opposed to this bill and to those of you who are in favor of this bill, please keep a couple of things in mind. Number one, we, the tenants that are here today, represent 47% of the households in Philadelphia. That's over half, almost half Philadelphia's people live as tenants. So that means almost half the residents really have no power over their living condition because they're not homeowners. They're just renters. Yes. And they live at the mercy oftentimes of someone over them as a landlord. So this bill is extremely important to let half the residents of this city feel that they have some rights, some kind of power of something.
Other point is, Councilman Down referenced investment properties. Investment properties are fine, but they should be, when they involve owning a residential building, then they need to have some regulation to it, because people's lives are involved. People's things are involved in their lives, not just having an investment property. So I want to thank Councilman Jones, Councilman Greenlee, anyone else that's here. And Councilman Jones, as you know, you helped us get the diversion court for foreclosed homeowners. Let's give the tenants something more close to that, where they have a chance, a fighting chance if something does go wrong. We're trying to get the tenants some rights like you gave us for diversion court. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Gwendolyn Tola, and I'm currently a PHA resident who's been evicted as of today and locked out because of someone saying I was selling drugs. I also have foster kids in my home, and I have grandchildren I have custody over. So when they say about black women is the ones, I am one of them ones that fit into that dilemma of a mother and a grandmother who's being evicted, and I don't owe any rent to them. My rent is up to date right now as we speak, but they don't have a cause of why they want me evicted out of my unit. The landlord that's evicted me said because there's other people living there in my home, which they're not there. She says they're using the address and they have people sitting out my home watching who's coming in and out to see their foster kids and come visit, and saying they were selling drugs out of there in order to get me out of the unit for a big developer that's building in front of my door. Now, this good cause is the reason why I'm here today to speak out against this, because there's a lot of people that I know that's under PHA that's being evicted for the same reason, because they want a big developer coming in there, putting in these apartments that's so high that you got to pay, even if you going through diversity or gentrification, you can't even afford to get one of them apartments to live in or to reside in. So low-income housing is put for us, and I've been in my unit for 9 years now, and here she comes with, I got a writ to be out of there, and she wants me out of there as soon as possible. So she terminated my lease and gave me 10 days to move, and I'm not going nowhere without the reason of why I have to leave my unit. You collected my money for 9 years, and then you come up because a developer come across the street for me, and you feel as though I got to get out so he could build this monstrosity in front of me? No, I'm not going nowhere. I'm going to stay right where I'm at. He can build what he want. I'm not being gentrified out of my house. I'm not being put out behind him coming in over me with what he wants to come in over me on. So she could kick, we gonna go battle this thing out today. So after I leave here, I'm going over there to the courts and put in my emergency writ to stop them from putting me out of my house.
Okay.
And
Thank
my
you,
children too.
Thank you. Anyone else here to testify on the bill? Thank you. That concludes the hearing of the Committee on Law and Government, and we will proceed with the meeting very shortly.
As soon as we find Ellen.
You got that?
Yeah, I know.
I will now go into the public meeting of the Committee on Law and Government, and we have a quorum. The chair recognizes Councilman Jones regarding Bill number 171109.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that Bill number 171109 be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at our next session of council.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Bill number 171109 is reported as committee favorably with a rule suspension. Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion that Bill number 1711, Resolution 171134 be moved from this committee with a favorable...
No, meet with the amendment first.
Oh, got it. 1 second.
Just move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment for Bill number 171134, which has been circulated to all members of council, and I move for the adoption of the amendment.
It's moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman.
I'll take president. If I get his salary, I'll take it.
I move resolution number 171134 as amended be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation and no suspension of the rules.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, resolution 171134 as amended, report is out of this committee favorably. Councilman Jones.
Thank you. I move that Bill number 171113 be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and I further move that the rules of council be suspended to allow first reading in our next session of council.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, Bill number 171113 is reported out of this committee favorably with a rule suspension. Councilman Jones.
Thank you. I move that Bill number 170716 be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation. I further move that the rules of council be suspended to allow first reading of this bill at our next session of council.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, Bill number 170716 is reported as committee favorably with a rule suspension. Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I move resolution number 170743 be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, resolution 170743 is reported out as committee favorably. Councilman Jones.
Yes, Bill number 170854 is amended, and I'm moving the amendment which has been circulated to all members be approved.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the amendment to Bill number 170854 is approved. Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. As approved, the amendment of 170854 be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation. I further move that the rules of council be suspended to allow the reading of this bill at our next session of council.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Bill number 170854 is amended. Is reported out as committee favorably with a rule suspension. Everything right? Yeah, which one? This one? Yeah. Yeah, he suspended rules. Yes. Being no further business for the Committee on Law and Government, thank you all very much. I did my best to get that.